Welcome to day 3 of the Jobtech for Refugees Summit, hosted by NAML and Jobtech Alliance. The Jobtech for Refugees Summit is a 3-day virtual event examining what it actually takes to convert displaced people into sustained work. My name is Lorraine Charles, and I'm the founder and executive director of NAML. This is the 3rd and final session of the summit. In this session, session 3, we will examine what happens before placement, where the skilling programs are preparing refugees for the work that actually exists. Across the ecosystem, skilling interventions are often designed around what can be funded and delivered at scale, but not what labour markets are actually absorbing. The result is a widening gap between what programs produce and what employers need. And we heard over the last 2 days some of the challenges that the private sector faces in terms of hiring refugees, but also we had other challenges from other partners. One thing which sticks in my mind is we're training the wrong talent. Are we training talent who can actually transition into the work that we're expecting them to have? To help us with this discussion, I'm pleased to introduce our moderator today, Nhial Deng, a refugee who has just completed his degree in Canada and who himself has personally navigated the skilling ecosystem. I'll let him share his story, which is super fascinating. I'm also excited. Bahana is Executive Director of Solidarity Initiative for Refugees, a refugee-led organization in Kakuma that provides access to education, digital skills, livelihoods, and entrepreneurship. Craig is the co-founder and CEO of Arifu, an edtech platform that delivers low-cost chatbot-style learning via SMS and WhatsApp. Is the executive director of Refactory, again, one of our other partners, the Uganda-based software skilling company that trains and connects tech talent to industry-relevant digital workforce. As you see, they're all my friends and colleagues. Daisy is a strategy advisor for Amahoro Coalition, which mobilizes African private sector to create jobs, investments, and economic inclusion for forcibly displaced people. Please go ahead and introduce the session, but also we want to hear a little bit about your story because that's as important as what we'll hear today from the panelists. So thank you, everyone. Welcome, and over to you, Nhial.
Thank you so much, Lorraine, for the great introduction and for your kind words. Very good to be here. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are. My name is Nhial Deng. I'm tuning in from Toronto, Canada. And as Lorraine mentioned, I grew up in Kakuma refugee camp. I spent 11 years in Kakuma refugee camp. I did all my schooling in Kakuma refugee camp. And I remember when I was done with high school in Kakuma refugee camp, the first question I asked myself is, what's next, right? And like many refugees in the camp, did a bunch of online programs that were available to us at that time. I did a bunch of training programs, on different skills, from computer to marketing to project management, whatever I could come across. And my main goal at the time was, making sure that I could transition to the job market now that I was done with my high school. It wasn't that easy. I think when you go to places like Kakuma, when you go to other refugee camps, I've had a chance to travel over the last few years, to different refugee camps across the world. You'll find people that have done a bunch of certificate program, but oftentimes the transition to the job market is very difficult. So I think that's why this session is very, very important because there's a very clear mismatch here. And I think those of us that work in this space can see that clearly. One of the things I was asking myself at the time was, should I focus on what was the demand at the camp at that time? I see the different factors you have to look into. And I remember, one thing I was like, oh, actually, maybe I should see what is possible in the remote job market. And, one of the skills that I was very good in is storytelling. So I took a certificate course in social media marketing. And from that, I was able actually to get a job and get hired by a UK company as a social media coordinator whilst I was still living in Kakuma refugee camp. I ended up working for them, for about 2 years. And then, while at the same time doing my community work in Kakuma refugee camp, running different programs to help young people and doing, advocacy on different issues that I was very passionate about. And then from in 2021, I, got a full scholarship. So in 2021, I moved to Canada, where I'm currently based, where I just finished my degree. I'm very excited. I actually did my last exam yesterday. So I'm still in the celebration mood, excited to see what is next. But I think, this is a very timely conversation. And again, I just want to thank Lorraine and the whole team for putting this together. Very excited to dive in the conversation, with our panelists here. So a session will look at this from 4 different segments. So the first one will be where the mismatch is the widest. And then from there, we'll transition into how skilling state is connected from demand. And then we'll look into what AI is actually changing. So AI, of course, we cannot talk about mismatch without talking about AI. And then we'll close with what need to ship, which I think is very important, when you look at next step from there. So to get us off, I'll start directly. When you design a skilling program for refugees, Do you start with what the market needs or with what you are able to deliver? And please try to be as much honest as possible, because I know this is something we struggle with all the time as organizations. We want to be able to deliver, but at the same time, I think it's important that we are conscious of what the market actually needs.
Thank you, Nhial. I think that's a tough question. What do you start with? I'll say it depends on what the funding requirements provide. So in many cases, the funder comes to you and says, I have this amount of money, I want to train 40 people. How do we go about it? And sometimes you use that as a basis to learn in order to improve what the next version or next iteration is. And I'll give a very practical example. So we had a training that was being funded under FinChurch Aid, and this talent was transitioning to Italy. And along the way, we realized that majority of them were not English speaking, and we needed to have somebody support from an Arabic perspective. And that we learned along the way. So the next iteration now integrates a bit of technical coaching that enables those that have Arabic proficiency or French proficiency to come in as technical coaches. So I would say on our end, it has been more of the agile version. So build as you go along, improve as you go along, depending on what time you have to deliver, as well as the constraints available. I hope that makes sense.
Yeah, no, it does. Thank you for sharing that. And we'll talk a bit more about the donor piece, because I think that's very important. Bana, over to you. What do you prioritize, the market needs or what are you able to deliver?
Well, I really want to answer this from where I actually sit. Somebody who has benefited from skilling opportunities in refugee camp Kakuma, where we operate as a refugee organization, but also as somebody who has provided these opportunities to other displaced and host community young people over the last 10 years. Because the hostness version of the answer doesn't start with the skills itself. It starts with who actually is in the room when these training programs are designed, or even before the curriculum is designed, or decided or written. More specifically for us as refugee organization is you have a partner or a donor designs a program, a tier program, or even a short-term program, of course with good intentions. This is designed without the refugee organization partner who actually called upon to implement these programs in the camps, and without the young people who are supposed to benefit from this program. So then the partners or the donors come to us and say, hey, can you guys deliver this? Because of course, we are rooted in this community. We live here. We run the best digital hubs in Kakuma. And frankly, we are cheap to run, to say it so. And attached to that, there's a huge, big number, an enrollment target that is actually, honestly, often disconnected from what is realistic, given the resources that is given to you to do that job properly. So what do we do? Of course, as a local organization, we mobilize. And in a place like Kakuma, that's not hard. Young people, as you rightly said, will show up for almost anything because Hope is doing a lot of the work here. Someone will sign up for a digital marketing course, not because they actually want to be a digital marketer, but because they're thinking, maybe this is the only opportunity that finally will get me closer to getting a paid job or work. And what that produce over years, it's something, I usually call the NGO skilling gap, the NGO skilling trap. So Alana has been through nearly every digital skills training going on in the camp, from computer basic, then digital marketing, then graphic design, then data annotation, then web development, then whatever comes next, and has never once been placed in any paying opportunity. So we mobilize first the wrong participant, program design, without the pipeline in mind, and that's where the double mismatch lies. And we just do it because the donor required us to do this program in such a way with minimum, meaningful engagement of the young people who are supposed to benefit from this program.
Thank you, Ban. And I think actually I'll stay with you for a bit before I let you go. You mentioned, a lot of great point there. I think one thing that stood out to me again is engagement. I think that is important. Again, we always say, nothing about us without us. But Bana, you're someone actually on the ground. So you're talking to people a lot. You listening to young people. From what you're hearing, but also from your own perspective, What are the skills that the market is actually asking for right now? The refugee skilling programs like the one we have in Kakuma and in other places are consistently not building.
Well, thanks, Nhial. So when you ask what skills the market wants that you're not building, yes, of course, I can give you, a bunch of lists when I read this global trend report on which basis many, donors or partner base their programming on. But honestly speaking, this has to start with conversations with the employers, what the market, what the employers actually need, going beyond the global trend report and all that. But if I can give you a couple of examples, I'll give you right now with all the development happening in the digital economy and the globe and the world, technologically, I can think of AI paired domain skills. What does that mean? This is not just generic computer literacy skills. So we need people who can pair a real skill, lead generation, full stack development, AI system building with fluent judgment-driven use of AI tools, because that's where the wage premium actually is right now, and it's growing. Of course, in addition to those, AI paired domain skills, we also need client-facing skills, what we usually call soft skills. So, like training our young people how to scope their work, how to price it, how to hold conversation with a real client, not just the technical execution, because the technical hard skills we provide them is actually what allows them to get their first job. But the soft skills is what enable them to retain that job and even scale get the next job. So that's how, for me, those are some of the skills I see, a little bit more relevant, but that's not an exhaustive list. There's still so much to do. Having those conversations, the folks who give us the job, and honestly speaking, we, as much as we're very relevant as intermediary, as organization in between, we also need to minimize how much we manage programs or tasks for our young people, because we, at some point, some of our programs turn these young people, actually innovative and bright young people, into robotic. You manage everything for them, and they're just doing some micro work here and there that doesn't make them relevant in the current.
Thank you, Ban. And we'll come back to that AI piece a bit later, because I think it's very important, especially with what is happening around the world right now. I'll move to Daisy. Daisy, good to have you with us here. I had a chance to attend Amahoro, 2023 gathering in Accra, Ghana, and the work that you do as an organization is incredible. I know as part of your work, you have visibility across the skilling landscape, in the entire region, and we're talking here, across, what's happening in the entire East Africa region, and maybe even across the continent as well, with your work with refugees. Where are you seeing the biggest concentration of training that is in mapping to where the jobs actually are? And why does that keep happening all the time?
Thank you so much. I'm glad to hear that you've attended AFD, and we have the next one coming up in November in Addis. So if you're not already involved, please get involved. I think this is the hardest part that the world is facing. If this isn't a refugee problem, is we don't know what skills I need tomorrow. So I could tell you right now what skills I'm getting on the Amahoro Skills Hub, where we post jobs for employers, but it's not given that those skills will be the ones that are needed right now. But I think, feeding what Michael said, we get a lot of requests for BPOs, for example, of Arabic speakers, German speakers, sometimes Spanish speakers, obviously coupled with English as well, which sometimes gets forgotten in some of these offers. And then if you look at it, obviously we know how far things are going right now, but you look, I think I read yesterday in Forbes that China was dropping some 12,000 courses from their university degrees and replacing them with 10,000 other courses. And a lot of the things that are dropping are obviously things we know that AI can now do, be it translation. And so I was actually questioning on these skills, and had a conversation with Nuba from Namal this morning as well around where the future is. Is it still useful to learn languages, which is what I would say right now, because what I'm seeing from employers, because the language is where the jobs are, right? So we're getting these jobs that are coming in from Germany, from France, even from Latin America, sometimes from Spain. So the languages are needed, Arabic speakers needed. And so I was questioning whether are these still skills that we need when I speak fluent French, yet I still will type in English and just ask ChatGPT to translate an email for me. But the thing is, you still need these skills that, saying, like feeding what Bahana says, the soft skills, the client-facing skills. You still need to be able to build relationships, to communicate, and to sell. For example, we had a lot of requests for sales jobs, which aren't always the most trained on, and that's where Nova and resilient people come in really well as well, is looking if I'm speaking from an employer's perspective, and this is where we often have this even internally at Amahoro, this friction between our client service unit, which is where clients for us are the forcibly displaced persons, where obviously you want to be me looking for jobs that match the skills that the talent have, but at the same time, I'm on the private sector side, and I'll always say, yes, refugees have as many skills as they do hands. Like we can do this, and then that not being met, and it's just a case of sort of following what we can do now, which I would say is obviously the AI skills, the tech skills, the soft skills that we mentioned, the languages skills, sales skills, because at the end of the day, what an employer wants is that you're either helping him make money, helping him save money, or helping him solve a problem that they can't solve. And I think that's also something that is also interesting to always add on the employer side, sort of the diversity element that comes into it.
Thank you, Daisy. We'll now move, to expand a bit on the disconnect. And, I'm glad we have people that have been looking at that more deeply, and, hopefully they'll share their experiences. So I'll start with Craig. Your report showed that your platform reached 8,000, learners, 5,600 of them refugees. So that's really shows strong engagement, good completion rate. Usually certificates form a weak connection to actual employment because learners use this skill for short-term livelihood decision, not career pathways or long-term career pathways. What key lessons in your experience have you drawn around the limits of skilling when it's not connected to demand on the other end of the spectrum?
Thanks, Neil. Obviously, this whole conversation is focused around skilling for the purpose of employment, access to work. But taking a step back, I would just say, access to information and skilling, I would view it as a fundamental freedom that is enabling across the board. And so I think we do want to see what more can it lead to, but it is often an end in and of itself. I know that's a bit of a counter narrative. I just think it's important to put out there, food for thought. Another is just the specific interests and learning goals that the learners would have. So with that program, what we actually found was when we measured and spoke to some of our learners, their main goal was actually not employment. Their main goal was entrepreneurial skill development, which was really interesting. And in that case, that program was very much geared towards small business skills, helping people better equip themselves to be able to start a business or to grow the small business that they have, self-employment. That being said, it is difficult when we get to roll things out. We see great engagement. We're trying to balance all these donor requirements. People have been skilled, and then what's next? To I think your comment you were making earlier, like there's that opportunity that can be missed when it's just a skilling program, or when we're not really bundling the skilling with the what's next. Karibu Digital did a fantastic meta study a couple of years ago that really showed skilling programs generally have much stronger performance with income, business growth, profitability when there's bundling happening. And the bundling can be with jobs. It could also be bundling to financial products and services. And that bundle, so I think we want to understand, what is that individual's goal? How do we then bundle in the right, let's say, opportunity to go together with the skilling, which could be jobs, but it could be many other things. The last point I want to just kind of make about this is one of the main lessons from that was, yes, we found skilling on its own, there was a missed opportunity where we didn't really have the bundling nailed down. I would say it was a light touch bundling with digital tools. What we went on to do after that was get into a program supported by the Gates Foundation called Be a Boss Lady. And in that case, we reached over 1 million women, and it was across Eastern and Western Africa. In that case, we ran needs assessments with both employers and with the learner audiences so that we could really match up what both groups were saying. So employers were wanting things like soft skills, creative problem solving, specific jobs they wanted filled more so from the target demographic, like sales and customer support roles. We could then go speak to those that were seeking jobs, say, what do you really want to know? And they were saying some overlapping things, but also they wanted training on social media, online presence, technical computer skills. And that allowed us to really match it up and say, okay, this is where we're going to focus our energy because we can't do everything. So let's build these particular skills. Then to really address that gap, we created an API with an organization called Brighter Monday and Jobberman, who came in with the job matching. So that was nice because when people then go through, they get skilled, they get their certificate, that certificate actually shows up for them in a job matching platform, which we send them over to. That was helpful, right? So that gets people closer to that matching. I would though say that at the end, there's still a little bit of a dice rolling happening. Like we're putting everyone together and we're hoping for the best a little bit, that the income and the jobs will occur. So something to come back to later in the conversation, but our kind of main next solve for that has been with a program we've just done right now, which we're growing, which is more actually exactly on AI. And that's with one-to-one pairing of specific gigs with individuals and training them on that gig. So it's a much more direct connection from skill to income opportunity, and we'd love to share more about that. We think AI is a big opportunity.
No, absolutely. I could not agree more. And I think, if there's one thing that stood out from me is that, and you've shared a lot of great practices that I hope, other organizations here can replicate as well, is that we have to engage continuously throughout the entire journey with both, the employers, but also the people who are reskilling, so that we can make sure, we connect those gaps between the two. I will move back to Michael. How do you decide what to teach? How often does that change based on what employers are actually hiring for through the process?
Thank you, Nhial. So probably the best is to contextualize. So Refactory really started from a point of there was an industry gap. You had people going to university and not being able to find work. And industry on the other side were saying we can't find talent. And so by the time we started working in the refugee space, we had spent quite some time working with industry here in Uganda to just understand what are your requirements for the industry that you're working in. What talent are you looking for, and what competences would make you hire somebody who doesn't have any prior skill, like 1 year, 2 years, which is normally the case. And so we co-created a training program with industry that started off purely from a software engineering perspective, and now we've gone all the way to data science, machine learning, and AI. And so what we do deliver to the refugee community here is really based on what we've seen and appreciated with the industry on our regular programs. A number of times we have had to customize specifically for the refugee requirements, because sometimes you probably need to lift them up a little bit to get them to what your current offering requires. We have what we call training as a service. So if you come and you want to offer a specific package, we curate it with you with an understanding of who is going to be the beneficiary of the training. Where are they at with regard to digital work with technology? What are they working on? And the result is that we see better transition into work, because you are aligning the requirements with industry. Probably the final bit is that the people who deliver the program for us at Refactory, we don't have full-time facilitators. All our facilitators are industry-based. So they only come and teach for 2 hours or 3 hours and then go back to their work. And the basis is that we want you to teach from your wealth of knowledge and practice, as opposed to, I have learned this in school, or I have taught myself this, and therefore I'm coming to teach you. No. We want you to be in industry, and all I need are 2 hours a day or 1 hour a day, and you can go back and do your other thing.
Thank you, Michael. I'll move to Nova from Resilient People. Nova, thank you for being here. You work directly with displaced communities. When refugees go through skilling programs and come out on the other side, what is the gap they describe between what they learned and what they actually needed to navigate the labor market that they're now trying to go into after learning the skills?
Thank you. It's a really good question. And it's something we think about a lot at Resilient People. And I think there's two big areas that people come to us with gaps in. We take a lot of people into our programs that have done many programs before. And the biggest thing that is missing is usually the commercial understanding of what those skills actually mean in the labor market. So lots of people will come to us, I'm a digital marketer, brilliant. Do you know why businesses need digital marketing? Like, what is it that a business needs digital marketing to achieve? I can data annotate, brilliant. What does that give to a business which is providing value? And obviously we're closer to that end of the scale anyway, because we're training people to do sales, which is just commerciality. So it forms a lot of our conversations. But I'll always remember in one of our first cohorts, I asked our trainees, what is it you think these businesses exist for? why do these businesses exist? Why do you think they want to grow? And one of our trainees lived his whole life in Kakuma, had done all sorts of different training, super accomplished, really clever guy. He's doing really, really well now. But he said, well, because they want to create more impact. And it really dawned on me at that moment that his exposure to corporations, to professional businesses, was them coming into the camp to support him in different ways and provide philanthropic care to him and people he knew. The only exposure that he had to professional business was this kind of philanthropic giving. And I had to start from, actually, I'm so sorry to shatter this worldview, but most companies don't really care. People, it's like about making money and growing as fast as they can and pleasing their shareholders. And even just that small kind of bit of education really changed the way we look at the skills that we give to our cohorts. We start with, we call it a mini MBA now, where they learn all different kinds of portions of business and how that actually fits with the business's goals. And the other, and it's slightly different for resilient people because I run the apprenticeship side of our business, but ultimately resilient people hires the majority of our trainees, which means this is something we're more invested in than some other people, but it is the gap between what people expect from a job and what is the reality of a professional job. And I think this isn't very often talked about because it's difficult, but many people haven't had exposure to a professional career. So they don't know things like, for example, a normal work day in a corporate job is 9 till 5, Monday to Friday. I forgot to say that to one cohort. They all turned up on Saturday. And I was like, oh, sorry, I don't work on a Saturday. It's a day off. It's about how they communicate professionally across the different hierarchy of a business, like the timeliness with which they turn up to meetings. And these they seem small, and their soft skills, they're so easy to teach, especially with consistency. But if someone hasn't been in that environment, I really think that those are the things that hold people back when they are meeting employers and they don't know how to hold those professional conversations. They don't know how to follow up a meeting invite and send a professional email. They don't know how to conduct themselves. It just holds people back really quickly. And they are skills that you can teach, but they come over time and practice of doing them time and time again, and kind of a relentless expectation of having those standards held.
Thank you for sharing that. Actually, another personal story to share. I remember when I moved to Canada, I was very excited. I got here in 2021, and before moving here, I've already done so much work in Kakuma. I've worked for different organizations. And in Canada, they have this thing they call the Canadian work experience. So even if you come with 10 years of work experience from everywhere else, they value Canadian work experience so much that it's so difficult to break into the job market. And oftentimes it's because of this small thing that we forget, the soft skill of that oftentimes, are different in different workspaces, the different background people come from, that make it difficult to integrate into a new, work environment. So thank you for highlighting that, and thank you for the work you do on that. I will go back to Daisy. Everyone has mentioned donors. A lot of skilling in this space is funded by donors. How much does the way the funding is structured, the timeline, the reporting requirement, the skill target, all of us that have applied for grant know how exhausting it can be, that entire process. But how does that process shape what actually get taught, and even when the market is asking for something different?
Thank you. And I think I love what Nova just said. And one of the main issues I had when I started at Amahoro that I didn't expect was that when I was finding jobs for the clients, they were turning them down, which I didn't expect. And a lot of the reasoning for that are some of the things that Nova mentioned, is just not just the workplace expectations aligned with what's on the market, but the way that a lot of these programs work are not only, yes, what can we do? And the metrics are, we've trained 100, I'll use the example of tailoring. We've now taught 100 women in Kakuma how to be tailors. But the bit that doesn't get said a lot, if you're inside our world, if you're outside of the world of this bar space, you don't know, is that because the expectation for that donor, and this could be an RLO that's managing this, they need to get 100 women certified in tailoring with their certificate, have shown up every day to the training center and have learned these skills. So what a lot of the programs end up doing is paying transport fees, paying food, sometimes even paying a stipend for people to show up and train, which is very disconnected from what happens in the commercial world, where we pay to train, we pay to learn. And so then what was happening for me is I was saying, okay, we've got all these tailors, they can't all be tailors, but I found a company that needs people that can sew. A mattress company in Nairobi needs people that can sew. They also operate in Uganda. They might even want to open up towards the border as well in Sudan. Amazing. I'm going to get hundreds of people jobs. But then when they found out the salary and the fact that they had to pay their transport and they were going to get paid half a daily rate of what they were getting paid to train to tailor, why would I take up a tailoring job? Why would I take up this job when I could just wait for the next donor program to come along and I can learn cybersecurity and get paid to learn cybersecurity and get my transport stipend, get my lunch, stay and have some kind of security? And unfortunately, I think as long as the metrics are around how many people are trained and not how many people are actually accessing employment after this, we're just going to keep repeating this cycle. That's why at Amahoro, we don't train. We get asked about training programs or companies that offer to train, but unless that training comes with a job at the end. So I don't mean to say that I expect people to take whatever job comes. It was just a learning that came on to me when I was learning, when I was doing this job. And I think the angle that I'm seeing that's interesting in the private sector now is I've been at quite a lot of events, because a lot of the time, especially with the way MasterCard Foundation, for example, operates, or different organizations operate, we're talking about forcibly displaced people and differently abled people with disabilities. And what I'm seeing that companies are doing for them that are working with donors, which I think is interesting, is instead of waiting and saying, I've now got PWDs that have got a diploma in software engineering, they're actually going to the source, looking at what they need, and they're working with organizations to train people in the skills they need. Because the private sector knows what they need more than the donors know what the market needs. So I think there needs to be more private sector engagement in the design of these programs and partnerships with actual jobs at the end of the training available.
Yes, I think I could not agree more. I think we have to do a lot to rally and bring more actors on board. And also you mentioned something, about, the numbers. I think that is something we really need to challenge ourselves, especially as, nonprofit doing this work. That oftentimes we go too much for numbers, but I think the focus should be actually making sure that people have the opportunity to thrive throughout the whole journey. So, keeping a bit of a balance, quantity, what do they say? Quality over quantity. I'll try to summarize a bit the next segment, which is also very important on AI. And I'll start with Nova and Michael. If you can just briefly tell us, from what you're already seeing on AI. AI is of course changing, every single entry level jobs. I follow AI a lot. I read a lot about AI. Everyone is talking about job displacement. I'm just wondering, from your own work, have you had to change what you teach because of AI? And if so, what did that look like in practice? And if you haven't yet, why?
Sure, thank you. Good question. And we get asked that about AI a lot. I think there's two things. One is, I think there is a lot of unknown about AI globally in every industry all the time. So actually there's a lot of things that are changing because of AI. My personal opinion and the way that it has been implemented into our training is that in order to be able to use AI to do a job well, you have to know how to do that job well yourself. So you cannot use AI to produce the outcomes that a human could produce unless that human can produce those outcomes without AI. So that means that in the skilling sector, actually, my opinion is it doesn't change too much, really. We still need to have people that are empowered with knowing how to generate the outcomes and what outcomes are good, in order that later when we do introduce AI or we teach people how to use AI to generate those outcomes, they are the judges of whether or not that's actually valuable output to put into the world. The growth of AI actually creates opportunities. So we talk about sales is on two fences about AI. Some people think AI is changing sales. It's going to be easy for everyone. Everyone's going to be able to do loads of sales. Our opinion at Resilient People is actually the growth of AI means that human salespeople are more valuable than ever. Only a human can make a connection with a human. There's a reason we all get irritated when we read an email and we know it's AI, because we're like, you were pretending to be a human. We wanted a connection. Like, I'm trying to connect with you. And only humans can do that. So actually, AI can create, and I don't know what it is in other industries, I'm sure there's other places, AI can create a need for real human people. And I think that's a really big area, especially for the kind of work that we do, where we're skilling people into really human-powered areas. And I think it creates opportunity as well. So we've not changed a lot of our training. We've changed some of our infrastructure about how we train and support people. But yeah, I have strong opinions on that.
Thank you, Nova. That is a conversation we can have for the whole day. Over to you, Michael.
Certainly in this space, we have just completed a training with partners in Italy, and after we had completed the training, when the employers did the assessments, they came back to us and said, we would like you to upskill this talent with AI capabilities. And so we're now designing an upskilling program for them in order for them to be able to get into the different job opportunities. So as I said, there are quite a number of opportunities there. But if the foundation is shaky, you will be called. We tell them, we tell the participants, the people that we train, that yes, it can give you kind of a feel you're on top of the world, but I can bet when you go to the employer and you can't really go through your code and explain, the employer will tell you this was not you. We just have to be honest and candid that we invest in the critical skills.
Thank you, Michael. I really want to make sure we have time to interact with the audience. So Craig and Bon, I'll give you both 1 minute to talk about the other side of the all AI conversation. So AI can displace refugees, but can it also make them more competitive? In 1 minute.
Thanks, Nhial. I'm not sure this is something we can discuss in 1 minute, but to be honest, I really cannot pick one side, because I have watched both happen to our students in Kakuma. Over the last decade, we've trained over 2,500 young people, women, digital skills, from computer basic through to full stack engineering, providing them mentorship and connecting them financing opportunities. And between 2019 and 2023, we actually had over 300 adolescent girls and young women trained in skills like transcription, data labeling, annotation, so on and so forth. And they were all connected to microtask opportunity. And in a normal day, you'd get a young girl going home with, between 500 and 1,000 Kenyan shillings. Why? Because by that time, there were opportunities for those kind of skills, for AI training. But today, many of these young girls, they're finding it difficult to get the same opportunities because of the AI advancement. So we are seeing right now. So you have now more and more AI models training at the LLMs. And that's not hypothetical about AI displacement. And sometimes people don't just want to acknowledge the fact that, yes, AI is having an impact on some of the training skills categories that we've been providing to these, to refugees. So yeah, so you see the platforms you are training on, the kind of skill like the transcription, annotation, the data says are collapsing fastest right now under AI. So, and unfortunately, we are not bracing for that disruption. So I'll say honestly that for a chunk of our learners, it's already happening, and it's happened on top of an already existing exploitative microtask economy and that's something we can talk about maybe in another conversation. So yes, AI is a threat, but a threat to a very specific layer of work. And I agree with the colleague from resilience people mentioned that, AI is just it just augment your capacity, supercharge your ability. You must be good at doing your work, and then AI would come in to make you better. The other side is also real, Nhial, So the same data shows that freelancers who've picked up AI fluency are pulling ahead very fast, because then, AI is allowing them to make their outcome better, to support them to quickly do their job. But now the question is, where's the tips of the balance? So 3 things. 1, we need to stop training tasks and start training, the layer above it. Like, how do you make a transcriber more relevant in the current age?
Thank you, Bar. Now over to you, Craig.
Yeah, I'm very aligned with all that. I think all of us that use AI as a tool know that it is transformative and enabling. So that will also be true for everyone, and including refugees. But I think for me, it is an upside, it is an opportunity, and it's not as a tool, it is AI as an economy. And that shift in mindset is going to be a big deal for refugees in particular. So AI models, including those that run on robotics and embodied AI, they all have weaknesses, they all have limitations. In the process of them to actually improve those model performance and robotics performance creates an enormous amount of demand for human labor and human work. To create speech recordings and transcriptions, annotations, video training for robotics, etc. Those are the specific types of data that must be created to run through trainings to enhance those model capabilities. And that's what we've started now pilot in just last week in Dadaab, displaced populations in Kampala. And I think the opportunity for refugees in particular is tremendous, partly because they're able to work remote, digitally connected, and the language skills of the community. There's a lot of upside. Would love to explore it with folks on the call that also are interested in looking at how we could partner up in that type of space.
Thank you, Craig. Thank you, everyone. I want to move to our very patient audience who've been here. Thank you so much for being here. I'm seeing a lot of engagement in the chat, which is good.
So there's a question directed to Daisy or Craig. From your experience, why do you think this approach of measurement, which you're talking about training to place, is not landing with the donors? Why do you think that is? And then the follow-up question is, if it was to change, what do we have to do to make sure they understand and change their mindset on that? Many refugees hold university degrees and professional experience. How can Jobtech ensure that skilled refugees are matched with jobs that reflect their qualifications rather than just their refugee status?
You can go.
Sure. I mean, I think towards the donors when I speak about it, but I don't think that they necessarily just want to report on numbers. I think it's a lot easier. It's a lot easier to be able to say, in 6 weeks, we managed to train this amount of people, rather than 6 months later, dive down and see, okay, out of these 1,000 we've trained, how many actually got opportunities? Because like either it's resources, it's, we all know monitoring evaluation, especially for donors, is not always the most straightforward, easy, resource-free thing to carry out. So I think there's that issue of, okay, I've got money, it needs to be given. And I think, again, very personal opinion, but in the eyes of someone who's maybe giving money every month to an NGO or an organization, they want to know that that money is reaching that grassroots level. And that's the easiest way to demonstrate that is happening. I don't think anyone's cracked the code of placing at scale, which is just a tricky market to be working in. And then I think the last point around the question, I think that another Daisy added in the chat, is between funders and private sector. Again, one of my biggest learnings when I joined Amahoro and started calling private sector partners was, if I was back in the UK and I called a company and said, hi, I'm calling from an NGO, they would expect me to be asking them for money or asking them for resources. In East Africa, at least from my experience, when I call a company and say I work for an organization, they think I'm coming with money. And again, that was a really interesting disconnect for me to see. Is so then same thing, there's this expectation, even today, every time I speak with the private sector and say, do you have internship opportunities for refugees? They will say, sure, are you bringing the money? There's that expectation now as well, not just on the client side of how the social space works, but also on the private sector side. And so I think when private sector tries to work with donors, there is this mismatch as well of who is paying for what and why and who gets to claim it. And at the end of the day, why am I paying for you to get workers? But also, well, why am I going through all of the hassle of training and of trying to get paperwork and sorting everything out for you to reach your target? Again, but Craig, maybe you have more experience in this or a different opinion.
I agree totally with Daisy that it's just easier to measure, like total reach, total trainings delivered. That's kind of the low-hanging fruit. So I think there's some of that, but we've certainly seen some evolution and some development. I think it's a work in progress. So, but some of the bigger donors, like, specifically Gates and MasterCard Foundation, they do have programs where they are, forcing partners to measure jobs placed, income growth, and they're getting better at their frameworks, and figuring that out. Obviously, it's a mix depending where you are, what you're doing. One specific situation that we came up against. One donor that seemed quite constrained by their the charitable rules from their jurisdiction. There are certain legal rules around what they can spend their charitable dollars on and what they can't. And their approach to that was to stay very far away from specific forms of commercial outcomes that could benefit a commercial partner. It was unfortunate because at the same time, the donor's like, but we need sustainability. Well, that's code word for market forces. There needs to be a commercial value proposition. So how do you actually achieve commercial value proposition if you can't use the money to create a commercial value proposition for specific commercial players? So we've seen that just kind of crush a program and their metrics at the end of the day. And so I think that's where there's an innovation needed, is to not, don't be too shy about working with companies. They're not all evil. We can kind of work together and everyone brings in what they're good at. And hopefully we do get something that's going to be market force driven.
So there were two that were actually added. So one is many refugees hold university degrees and professional experience. How can Jobtech ensure that skilled refugees are matched with jobs that reflect their qualifications rather than just their status? So that was the question that I had asked before. The second that has come in is, do you think we are making progress in closing the mismatch that exists between funders' perspective and reality, and also with private sector? So that's the two that have come in.
Maybe I'll put Noba, Bana, and Michael on the spot. If you can just, respond to any of those questions that you're comfortable with, or even both in 1 minute, if you can.
Okay, I'll take the one of mismatch between qualified and I think what we've seen happen is where they've created a bit of incentive structure for the private sector to hire the refugees. That then makes it easy for refugees, because ideally one of the greatest challenges you have is around having that person in work. Now, what we're seeing is majority of these are gravitating towards starting up their businesses and then hiring within their community, which is also a good thing. But government has to play a central role in creating an incentive structure. Well, doesn't have to discriminate, but an incentive structure that gives the employer the benefit of, look at this opportunity. They have trained in your country. They have gotten your country skills, qualifications. Why are you not able to hire them? So I know for PWDs and refugees, there's a bit of an incentive structure that is not aggressively being pushed, but it's certainly there. There's traction in that direction.
The other question was about, can we make sure that people that leave university with skills and degrees get into the right jobs? Yeah, I think it's really interesting. And, I think Kenyans are very well educated. As far as I can, there's so much education in Kenya that actually my question is, is the education really the right thing for people getting into the workplace? Because it shouldn't be that a refugee has the same ability to the same level, the same expectation of getting a job as someone that has had 6 years of formal education. But that's where we are with a lot of applicants to us. We have people coming, 18-year-olds straight out of, school education, and people with 6 years degrees. So I think it's not a question of what can people do, but it is a question of how do we set up the economy and how do we encourage the right kinds of organizations to incentivize them to take on talent. And I think that comes from a number of different places, which I think would take too long to talk about. But I think there is incentivizing businesses, as Michael was saying, to hire refugees, firstly, because it is difficult. It's more difficult if you do have that situation where you can get a graduate who's had 6 years in education and has a master's degree in business, or a refugee that you have to jump through hoops to hire. You're probably going to choose the easy option. So that's not supporting our objectives of hiring more refugees. We also need to support the ecosystem of people willing to engage a little bit more, I think.
Thanks, Neil. Just very quickly, I wanted to comment on the last question on the perception of the donors, where we are there to address the mismatch. But I think this need to have a lot of conversations with the donors. I think ecosystem actors like the UNHCR. Recently, we've had a conversation with a potential donor, not going to mention the name. These guys are big in the tech sector. They're hiring globally in tens of thousands, but they're funding. They want to fund us to train young people and connect them to opportunity. But themselves are not ready to commit to absorb this talent. So then you ask yourself, how is it that somebody is giving you the money and has a capability to absorb some of this talent and would use that as a case study, as a promising practice, to inspire other private sectors in the ecosystem to, start hiring refugees, but are not ready to do that. So, but they are available, ready to give you the money to continue upskilling and having more and more refugees to get them. So so much that need to happen. Of course, a lot has been done already, but we still need to have that conversation and have all the ecosystem actors help us move the needle in closing that gap. Over.
Thank you, Bana. Thank you to our audience for your engagement. And, one last important question, one leadership. We talk a lot, about challenges. What do we need to change? And I want to leave with that. So, session 1 and session 2 of this summit, look at 2 different realities. The placement systems we have, which do not really exist. And then the employers, hesitant, to bring in new talent or individuals. Given those two realities, what is the one thing the skilling sector need to change about how it designs, delivers, and connect these programs? We can start.
I won't prescribe to the sector. That's above my pay grade, but I will say from our perspective, how we're approaching that is to shift from being skilling first to actually being job tech first, supported by skilling.
I guess for me, it is understanding for which market and for which users, and investing in that much, much deeper. So whichever entity you're going to work with, please, have the boldness to tell them, before I start the training, I would like to connect the dots before I can invest in this space.
What I would prescribe to the sector is to really understand our part in the ecosystem. We all play different parts in the ecosystem. Sometimes we compete against each other, or we try for the same outcomes. But actually, if we all understand that we all fit together and we can all work towards a goal together, I think that would make better outcomes for all of us.
Totally agree with Nova there. I'm often the down on things that need to change and that are very out of our control. But I think all of us working together and understanding that if we find opportunities and know that we might not have the talent but someone else does, or even if it's around funding and we aren't able to carry out that opportunity, how do we pass it on to someone else and make sure that if I'm finding companies that want to hire but I don't have that talent, how do I then let you guys in the training space know, okay, Safaricom wants to hire 100 people on these skills, can you train them? So that next year when this opportunity comes again, we don't miss it. So yeah, echoing what Nova said.
Thanks, Nhial. So one thing for me, it's really, we need to design programs with the people it's for. So that means, designing the whole ecosystem in mind, all the key players, that's starting with the young people themselves, the donors, the partners, the private sector, including the government as well. So for me, that's really important if you really want to move the needle.
I pretty much agree with all you've mentioned. Thank you for a great session. I think if there's anything that became very clear is that we have two machines here. There's the scaling machine and then the placement machine. We have to engage, with the actors in both two sides of these two machines. The refugees that we're trying to reskill, we have to engage with them continuously to hear what they're actually saying on the ground. And, Barney, you've emphasized that a number of times, but also the people on the other side, the placement part of it. We also have to engage with them. We have to rally more actors for more opportunities. We have a new system that can help us make refugees more competitive. I know, AI, I suppose it's pro and con, but, I think, it's ultimately, a tool that we need to engage with and learn how to use. And I think that also includes refugees. So thank you so much for a great session. I think this is a conversation that we need to continue having, both within ourselves, but also, and try to bring more actors into this space as well and engage with them on this very important topic, because I think this is one important way we can actually help people be able to rebuild their life and thrive and be able to have access to real opportunities by making sure they have these skills they need to be able to thrive, in the job market. Thank you for a great session. Thank you for your time. I'll pass it to Lorraine. And Lorraine, thank you again for having me and the whole team for putting this together.
Thank you so much, everyone. I want to leave everyone with one thought, and this session has been fantastic for all the panelists. So, Daisy, you mentioned, if Safaricom wants 100, what can we do? So often we're asked to train not at scale, not at 100, but in the thousands. And I feel this is where we get trapped, because it's okay to have a market-driven approach if you're training 50 or even 100. If the donor says to you, you have to train 10,000 a year, how is it possible to have a market-driven approach for 10,000 people? And Fabian said in the first day, we're training the wrong people. If you ask to train 10,000, you're training the wrong people. Three-quarters of them would be the wrong people. So I want to leave us with that thought. And I think this is where donors trap us. Donors are handcuffing us by saying you need to train 10,000 people a year and link them all to jobs. How is that possible with a market-driven approach? And I think at some point our next session will be with donors. How can we really engage donors and have an honest and frank discussion with them to say, you are making things hard for us, coming with the money, you're insisting we're doing all these things, and then the people on the continent are left struggling with the aftermath of what you've done. So how is this helping anyone? So perhaps that's the next question, being very provocative, but I think that's what we really need to address. So a huge thank you to everyone, the participants, the speakers, the moderators. We've pasted some resources in the chat, and the recordings of the 3 sessions will be emailed to you next week. So look out for that, as well as all the resources. A few of you have said you wanted to be in touch with some of the speakers. Please feel free to reach out to us and we can make the connections for you. This summit is part of a broader Jobtech for Refugees community of practice that NAML and Jobtech Alliance. We host bi-monthly meetings on topics related to refugees, work, and the intersection of technology. The link to join the COP is in the chat. So if you would like to join, we would love to welcome you. We have almost 60 organizations already attending our bi-monthly meetings. You can also join our LinkedIn page, our LinkedIn community of practice page. And again, comment and engage with us. The link is also in the chat. And finally, thank you all so much. This has been a fantastic 3 days, and we're really excited for the next one next year. In the meantime, please feel free to continue engaging with us, share your questions, and most importantly, we need to challenge the donors, because I think often that's where the challenge lies. Challenge the donors. When things don't make sense, we need to challenge the donors. Thank you all, everyone, and have a really wonderful day. Bye now.